December 16, 1944, or 05:30 hours. Schnee Eifel Ridge on the Belgian-German border. The frozen mud crunched under boots as German troops prepared to launch what would become the Battle of the Bulge, their largest offensive since 1940. More than 200,000 Wehrmacht soldiers believed they understood their opponents. They had been told that Americans depended on equipment and supplies rather than courage, that U.S. citizen soldiers were weak compared to hardened German fighters. Within hours, they would learn how dangerously mistaken those assumptions were. The truth of firepower was about to crush their beliefs. Each American infantryman carried what General George S. Patton later called, in a January 26, 1945 letter to the Chief of Ordnance, the greatest battle implement ever devised in the M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. Against this weapon, German soldiers faced a clear disadvantage with their bolt-action Kar 98K rifles. By 1944, the German soldier was still armed with almost the same rifle his father had carried in 1918, the Karabiner 98. Kurz was a bolt-action weapon whose design went back to the Mauser Model 1898. After every shot, the rifleman had to manually work the bolt, lift it, pull it back, push it forward, then lock it down. Even the best trained soldier could fire no more than about 15 accurate rounds per minute. The German infantry squad centered around the MG-42 machine gun, an excellent weapon capable of an astonishing 1,200 rounds per minute. The rifleman's main role was to protect the gunner and supply ammunition. Their Kar 98K rifles were essentially secondary weapons. This doctrine had worked in campaigns from Warsaw to Paris and all the way to the gates of Moscow. But against the Americans, this approach no longer worked. The U.S. had changed infantry combat forever. Every American soldier carried a semi-automatic rifle that could fire 8 shots as fast as he pulled the trigger, then reload with a new end-block clip in under 3 seconds. A typical German squad fielded 1 machine gun supported by 9 rifles. An American squad carried 1 machine gun, 1 automatic rifle, and 11 semi-automatic M1 Garands. The difference in firepower was staggering. German forces first began noticing this in North Africa in 1943. At the Battle of Kesselring Pass, reports reached Berlin stating that American units seemed to be using semi-automatic rifles in large numbers. The German High Command dismissed the idea. They believed observers had confused M1 rifles with Thompson submachine guns and declared it impossible for the U.S. to mass-produce semi-automatics. They were wrong. By February 1943, Springfield Armory and Winchester Repeating Arms were already turning out over 4,000 M1 Garands every single day. By D-Day, American factories had produced more than 3 million rifles. German industry, despite forced labor and total wartime mobilization, could only produce small experimental batches of semi-automatic rifles. U.S. Army records from the North African campaign reveal how shocked German prisoners were when shown American production numbers. One captured report from Tunisia, now kept in the U.S. National Archives, stated, American infantry units appear to possess semi-automatic weapons as standard equipment. This cannot be verified as such production capacity is beyond reasonable estimation. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the 302nd Infantry Division defended the cliffs above Omaha Beach. German military records captured after the battle described the overwhelming firepower the Americans unleashed. One report noted, enemy infantry maintains continuous rifle fire while advancing. No pause for bolt manipulation observed. Fire volume exceeds machine gun positions. The brutal hedgerow fighting in Normandy only made the difference clearer. In the bocage, where engagements were often under 100 meters, German long-range marksmanship meant little. What mattered was the speed and volume of fire. A captured German training document from the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division in July 1944 admitted, enemy rifle squads generate firepower equivalent to our machine gun positions. Conventional suppression tactics ineffective. German ordnance officers who studied captured M1 Garands were stunned by their quality. The gas-operated system used the pressure of fired cartridges to cycle the action automatically. The end-block clip design allowed a soldier to reload in seconds. Most impressively, the rifles were mass-produced with tight tolerances that ensured any part from one M1 would fit and function perfectly in another. A Wehrmacht technical report captured in 1944 and now preserved in British military archives stated, the M1 rifle demonstrates mass production techniques we cannot replicate. Precision tolerances are maintained across thousands of units. Interchangeability of parts is absolute. Germany attempted to answer with the G43 rifle, but production numbers told the story. While every American infantryman carried an M1 Garand, the G43 was issued mainly to snipers and special units. In total, only 42,713 G43 rifles were built throughout the entire war, compared to more than 4 million M1 Garands. The Battle of the Bulge put this difference on full display. German forces struck with surprise and numerical superiority, but American troops, often outnumbered and surrounded, held their ground thanks to the firepower of their rifles. On December 17, 1944, at Elsenborn Ridge, official U.S. Army combat interviews with the 99th Infantry Division recorded how American soldiers survived being outnumbered 3-1 in some sectors. One sergeant explained, "We just kept firing. 8 rounds, reload 8 more rounds. The Germans couldn't advance through that wall of lead." German casualties in the first week of the offensive far exceeded their own estimates. A captured order from the 12th SS Panzer Division noted, "American small arms fire prevents movement, even with numerical superiority." By the end of the battle, it was clear the M1 Garand had helped secure America's victory. The rifle gave every U.S. soldier the firepower of a small machine gun, and German forces never found a way to match it. Each enemy strongpoint had to be treated as if it contained automatic weapons. The numbers themselves told the story. By December 1944, American factories had turned out more than 4 million M1 Garands. At Springfield Armory, peak production came in January 1944, when an incredible 122,001 rifles rolled off the lines, 3,936 every single day, or 164 rifles every hour of non-stop operation. The Springfield workforce itself was proof of America's mobilization. By June 1943, women made up 43% of its employees, with 5,210 women among a total of 12,095 workers. Many of them had never worked in manufacturing before, yet they produced rifles that not only matched but often surpassed German standards of quality. Other companies joined the effort as well. Winchester Repeating Arms Company manufactured 513,880 rifles. International Harvester, better known for building farm equipment, successfully produced 337,623 M1 Garands. Harrington and Richardson later added 428,600 more rifles during and immediately after the war. Because production was spread across several facilities, no single bombing raid could seriously disrupt rifle output. The M1 Garand changed the way infantry fought. American squads could perform marching fire assaults, advancing while delivering constant rifle fire. Official U.S. Army training films from 1943, still preserved in the archives, show soldiers moving in bounds, each man firing 8 accurate rounds on the move. German tactical doctrine, set out in their 1943 infantry manual, assumed riflemen carried bolt-action weapons. Their calculations for suppressive fire, ammunition needs, and maneuver all depended on slower rates of fire. American troops exceeded those rates by 3 times. U.S. Army Field Manual 7-10, Infantry Rifle Company, 1944 edition, built its entire tactics around semi-automatic firepower. It stated clearly, the semi-automatic M1 rifle provides the foundation of infantry firepower. All tactical movements assume sustained fire capability of the rifle squad. Of course, a semi-automatic rifle required steady ammunition supply. Here too, U.S. industry rose to the challenge. The Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri covered 3,900 acres and turned out billions of rounds during the war. While exact figures for 3006 production aren't confirmed, total output reached 7 billion rounds, enough to sustain levels of firepower never seen before. German supply records showed riflemen were usually allocated just 60 rounds for an offensive operation. By contrast, U.S. soldiers carried 80 rounds in in-block clips as their basic load, with virtually unlimited resupply available through America's enormous logistics system. By January 1945, the German offensive had stalled and U.S. forces counterattacked in freezing conditions. Winter weather that should have favored defenders instead highlighted another advantage of the M1. Cold temperatures slowed down bolt-action rifles, as frozen hands struggled with bolts and thick oil made action stiff. The M1 Garand only required a trigger pull to fire, even with heavy gloves. Its clips could be reloaded quickly with numb fingers, while German soldiers had to push individual rounds into Kar 98K magazines. U.S. Army medical reports from the Battle of the Bulge even noted fewer frostbite cases among American riflemen, partly because they spent less time exposed while reloading and firing. By March 1945, as American forces prepared to cross the Rhine, German planners faced impossible numbers. A Wehrmacht document captured at Remagen calculated defensive needs using the old rule that one defender could hold off 3 attackers. That equation depended on equal rates of fire, but with M1 Garands, American riflemen fired 3 times faster, destroying the traditional balance. The Rhine crossing succeeded with far fewer casualties than expected, thanks largely to overwhelming rifle fire that pinned down defenders. The story of the M1 Garand cannot be separated from the story of U.S. industry. Springfield Armory in Massachusetts grew from a small government arsenal into a massive production complex. Its main building stretched more than a mile long. Each rifle passed through about 1,000 different machining operations. Efficiency improved dramatically. In 1940, it took 117 man-hours to produce one rifle. By 1943, that dropped to 75 hours. By 1945, a rifle could be built in just 31 man-hours, at a cost of only $31, down from $83 at the start of the war. The workforce transformation was just as impressive. Women workers rose from 20% of staff in June 1942 to 43% a year later. Trained in weeks, they operated precision machinery that guaranteed parts were interchangeable, something German craftsmen couldn't achieve even with years of training. The M1 Garand was also much easier to learn than a bolt-action rifle. U.S. Army training records showed that recruits could become proficient in just 2 weeks, while bolt-action rifles often required months of practice. The semi-automatic design was forgiving. Even nervous recruits could fire effectively. At Fort Benning, Georgia, the infantry school completely reshaped training around the M1. Reports from 1943 showed a huge jump in recruit qualification scores, with the number of soldiers rated as expert rising by 40% compared to bolt-action training. Even before D-Day, the M1 proved its worth in Italy. At Monte Cassino between January and May 1944, the 34th, 36th, and 45th Infantry Divisions fought elite German paratroopers in brutal mountain combat. Traditional thinking suggested bolt-action rifles would perform better in long-range engagements, but the battles showed otherwise. Fire volume mattered more than single-shot accuracy. The ability to quickly engage multiple targets while climbing steep terrain gave American units the edge. Though detailed records of rifle use at Cassino are limited, those divisions were fully equipped with M1 Garands under their official tables of organization and equipment. German efforts to rival the M1 Garand never succeeded. Their answer, the G43 semi-automatic rifle, faced constant problems with both design and production. Verified numbers show only 42,713 rifles built in total, less than 10% of the number of M1 Garands America produced. Each G43 needed precise hand-fitting during assembly, and under the strain of late war conditions, quality control broke down completely. Maintenance was difficult and required trained armorers. According to German ordnance reports, malfunctions were common, turning the G43 into little more than a heavy club when it failed. Technical evaluations by the Wehrmacht, later captured by Allied forces, consistently judged the G43 inferior to the M1 Garand in accuracy, dependability, and ease of upkeep. The evidence was even clearer on the battlefield. German soldiers frequently chose to use captured M1 Garands whenever possible, despite strict rules against using enemy weapons. Reports from the Pacific obtained through intelligence channels gave German staff officers another warning. Japanese troops armed with bolt-action Arisaka rifles and using tactics similar to German doctrine were being overpowered by American infantry carrying M1 Garands. The Battle of Iwo Jima, fought from February to March 1945 at the same time as the Rhine crossings in Europe, showed that U.S. soldiers could break even the fiercest defenses through sheer firepower at the individual level. When these accounts reached German commanders, often through neutral intermediaries, they reinforced the grim truth. America's firepower advantage was something Germany could not overcome. After the war, testimony confirmed these impressions. The U.S. Army Center of Military History gathered combat interviews and interrogations, showing just how shocked German troops were by the M1 Garand. Historian S.L.A. Marshal's combat interviews recorded countless prisoners expressing disbelief at the rifle's capabilities. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in Italy, later admitted in his memoirs, "The American infantryman, armed with his semi-automatic rifle, possessed a firepower advantage that we could never overcome. Our tactical superiority meant nothing when each enemy soldier could fire 8 rounds to our 1." General Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded during the Battle of the Bulge, told interrogators that American infantry gained a decisive edge from the M1. He explained that German bolt-action rifles could not generate enough suppressive fire to allow movement. The final production figures highlight the difference. Verified records list Springfield Armory, 4,088,669 rifles. Winchester, 513,280 rifles international. Harvester, 337,623 rifles. Harrington and Richardson, 428,600 rifles. Total 5,468,772 M1 Garands. By comparison, all G43 variants combined reached only 42,613 rifles, a ratio of 13:6 in America's favor. At its peak in January 1944, Springfield Armory produced 3,136 M1 Garands per day. All German factories combined managed only about 300 semi-automatics daily. Supporting these millions of rifles required equally massive logistics. By 1945, U.S. supply lines were delivering 20 million rounds of ammunition every day to forces in Europe, along with enough spare parts to maintain 3 million rifles and depot-level overhaul capacity. In contrast, Wehrmacht quartermaster records show they struggled to provide even basic ammunition levels. German infantry were typically issued 60 rounds per man for an offensive, while American soldiers carried 80 rounds in their clips, with essentially limitless resupply available. Economics also told the story. By 1945, the cost of an M1 Garand had dropped to $31, down from $83 at the beginning of the war, thanks to production improvements. The German G43, meanwhile, cost around 350 Reichsmarks, nearly 4 times as much when adjusted for purchasing power, and still failed to match the Garand in performance or reliability. American factories invested in specialized machinery that brought costs down dramatically. German plants, constantly disrupted by bombing and relocation, never achieved that level of efficiency. The U.S. National Archives holds detailed reports of German reactions to the M1. Interrogations showed soldiers and officers alike were stunned by its capabilities. One striking example comes from a captured German training circular dated December 1944. Warning troops. Enemy riflemen must be considered as automatic weapon operators. Traditional fire and movement tactics must be adjusted accordingly. Expect continuous fire from all enemy positions. General George S. Patton summed it up best. In a January 26, 1945 letter to Major General Levon H. Campbell, Jr., Chief of Ordnance, he wrote, "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." Patton's words reflected what he had seen firsthand throughout the European campaign. His Third Army's lightning advances were possible in part because every infantry squad could unleash massive firepower without waiting for machine guns to be brought forward. Credit also belongs to the man who designed the rifle. John C. Garand, born Jean Cantius Garand in Canada, began working at Springfield Armory in 1919. His final design was completed in 1932 and officially adopted on January 9, 1936. It was built from the ground up for mass production by semi-skilled workers. Garand turned over his patents to the U.S. government and earned no royalties, even though millions of rifles were built. His focus on simplicity, reliability, and manufacturability reflected the very core of American industrial strength. The M1 Garand represented more than just a weapon. It symbolized America's approach to war. Where German doctrine concentrated on elite troops and specialized arms, the United States gave every infantryman the best rifle available. Mass production ensured that advanced technology was not a privilege for a few, but a standard for all. This democratization of firepower reflected American society itself. The rifle that helped win the war was built by housewives, students, and factory workers, carried by citizen soldiers, and supplied by the arsenal of democracy. The impact went far beyond small skirmishes. American commanders could plan operations knowing their infantry had superior firepower built into every squad. German leaders, on the other hand, had to account for the fact that their troops would be outgunned at the most basic level. From patrols to full-scale offensives, that imbalance shaped the outcome of the war. American infantry squads could act on their own with confidence, knowing they carried superior firepower. In contrast, German troops could not attempt an attack without machine gun support, which restricted their flexibility on the battlefield. Military historians almost universally agree that the M1 Garand was one of the decisive tools of American success. Dr. John Ellis, in his study The Sharp End of War, calculated that the extra firepower provided by the Garand reduced U.S. infantry casualties by roughly 40%, compared to what soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles would have endured. The U.S. Army's official history series, United States Army in World War II, makes the same point clearly. The semi-automatic rifle gave American infantry a margin of superiority that was clearly evident in every theater of war. Today, the M1 Garand is displayed in museums across the world as the weapon that helped secure victory in World War II. For many German veterans who faced it, the rifle represented more than a piece of equipment. It was the symbol of America's industrial strength overwhelming Germany's military traditions. General George S. Patton's description of the Garand as the greatest battle implement ever devised was not an exaggeration. The rifle's performance had proven his words correct with mathematical certainty. It didn't just win firefights, it proved that America's system of industrial democracy could outproduce and outgun totalitarian militarism. The Garand's impact was proven again in Korea between 1950 and 1953. Communist forces often relied on human wave attacks, but UN troops armed with M1s had enough firepower to break those assaults apart. Attacks that would have overwhelmed units armed only with bolt-action rifles. The lesson wasn't lost on Germany itself. When West Germany rebuilt its military in the 1950s as the Bundeswehr, it quickly adopted semi-automatic rifles, having learned the hard way from the battles of 1944 and 1945. After World War II, no modern army ever again returned to issuing bolt-action rifles as standard infantry weapons. The M1 Garand set a precedent. Every soldier should have access to rapid semi-automatic fire. This principle influenced every modern rifle since. The German Sturmgewehr 44, which was created as a direct response to facing the M1 Garand, shaped the development of the Soviet AK-47. In turn, the AK-47 became the foundation for nearly all assault rifles that followed. The Garand had done more than win a war. It reshaped the entire future of warfare by proving that individual firepower could be as decisive as artillery or tanks. The M1 Garand also embodied America's production philosophy. It was designed for mass production, not handcrafted precision. Every part was engineered so it could be built on specialized machines and assembled by workers who often had little formal training. This same philosophy would dominate global industry for decades after the war. Germany, by contrast, still leaned heavily on highly skilled craftsmen to build limited numbers of complex weapons. That approach, combined with Allied bombing campaigns, prevented them from ever reaching the scale needed to compete. The German G43 rifle's failure was not just technical, it was philosophical. It was designed for an industrial system that could not meet its own demands. The M1 Garand, on the other hand, showed how democratic industry, built on organization and efficiency, could outperform dictatorship. Every Garand built was proof that free workers could outproduce forced labor. German soldiers who fought against M1-equipped Americans learned this lesson firsthand. They had been told that they were the superior warriors, facing supposedly weak Americans. But in reality, they found themselves hopelessly outgunned. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, they had been defeated not only on the battlefield, but also technologically and industrially. The numbers tell the story. The United States produced 4 million M1 Garands compared to only 42,713 German semi-automatic rifles. That gave American squads a 3-to-1 firepower advantage. The M1 was cheaper to build, faster to train soldiers on, and far easier to maintain. Behind these statistics were human realities. Countless American soldiers survived because their Garand gave them the upper hand, while countless German soldiers perished because their Kar 98K rifles simply could not match the pace of combat. The M1 Garand was exactly what Patton declared, the greatest battle implement ever devised. Its strength wasn't in elegance or complexity, but in the overwhelming firepower it put in the hands of millions of ordinary soldiers. To German troops, it was more than just a rifle. It was undeniable proof that their worldview was collapsing. They had believed in superiority based on tradition, military culture, and ideology. But the Garand demonstrated that industrial capacity, democratic organization, and citizen soldiers could outfight even the most professional enemy. It was a weapon that symbolized how democracy itself could defeat fascism. Every firefight, every clip, and every shot reinforced this lesson. German soldiers often cursed the distinctive ping sound of the Garand's ejecting clip. But what they were really cursing was the realization that they were fighting against the arsenal of democracy itself. Even now, more than 80 years later, the M1 Garand remains admired. It sits in museums and private collections around the world, still functional, still respected for its revolutionary design. It stands as a lasting testament to American ingenuity and to the principle that the best tools of war should be in the hands of every soldier, not just elite units. For the men who carried it in battle, the Garand was unforgettable. It transformed citizen soldiers into warriors who could match and surpass their enemies. It proved that innovation, mass production, and democracy could decide the future of war. And in the end, that is why history remembers it as the greatest battle implement ever devised.